on a very interesting topic, not yet touched by the anthropologists. The topic is right to information and international perspective. The abstract and Professor Roberts' short CV will soon be circulated to all of you. We have gone for xeroxing. What I would like to point out in this occasion is that we may be surprised that why anthropologists are interested in listening to a person who is specialized in law and governance. This is a very basic and fundamental question. So if you want to answer this question, you have to go back to the history of anthropology. Because the history of anthropology, we discuss it in the classes and I have a course of it. You can remember that anthropology started in a sense with lawyers' work. Three famous classical lawyers of England, they started in fact the anthropology. Their names are Sir Henry Maine, he was the former Vice Chancellor of Calcutta University. He wrote a book named Ancient Law, and this book was regarded as one of the major texts for the anthropologists who are interested in studying the evolution of law in the Indian subcontinent. The next person was MacLennan, who was a Scottish lawyer. He studied kinship and marriage. And the third one was John Bachofen. He was a German lawyer. So one historian of anthropology said that anthropology was, real anthropology, professional anthropology was born in the hands of the lawyers. So this is very interesting. And why anthropologists are interested, or why lawyers became interested in anthropology, is a very interesting question. So sometimes we forget our origin, and sometimes we think that anthropologists are persons who only study small societies in Africa, Australia, Oceania and interior parts of Andaman and Nicobar Islands. But when we look closely into how these small societies really operate and what happens when these societies come into contact with the so-called great civilizations, we find that the question of governance, every society is run by some kind of law and order. Sometimes these are written, codified, we call it law. But most of the times, the societies which anthropology studies have no codified law. But how then the societies run? How then the societies function? They function by following certain rules and regulations. Where do the rules and regulations come from? Is there any violation of the rules and regulations? These are the basic questions the anthropologists address. And here we collaborate with political scientists and persons interested in law. And that is why we have invited Dr. Rajkumar Kothari of the Political Science Department to chair this session. We didn't chair this session because a person who is very much well acquainted with laws, rights and responsibilities and duties of citizen. Alasdair has been studying these things for quite a long period of time. You see his series, and I must express my gratefulness because he has already sent 2 books to me written by him, excellent books, but these books have been snatched away from me by my political scientist friend. He says that I will not return these books to you because this is my book. This is a subject which I understand. So I agreed for a moment, but I immediately replied that we also have some use with these books. The anthropologists can very well use these books when they study the small society. Yesterday we were discussing about a very small community of people who were regarded as criminal tribes. They are known as the Lothars, and they live very near to our place in West Midnapur district. And these Lothars, you know why they were regarded as criminal tribes. There was a law in the British period, and that law is the criminal tribes law. By that law, certain tribes were regarded as criminals and certain restrictions were imposed upon them. For example, they could not move out in the night without showing a pass to the local police station. Now this Criminal Tribe Act was repealed after independence in 1952, and these tribes were regarded now as denotified tribes. Much later, again a law was enacted, and so what I'm emphasizing on laws, that anthropologists cannot avoid laws, either written or unwritten, and that is why we need the help of the political scientists and the people who study law and governance. So this Criminal Tribe Act was repealed. They were regarded as denotified tribes, and then further they are now regarded as PTGs, or primitive tribal groups. It's an irony in a country like India that we still have so-called primitive tribal groups. Anthropologists have had long debates whether they should be regarded as primitives or not. So I'm very happy, and let me tell you, I will end up with a very short anecdote that is with Alasdair. So I, as an anthropologist, became very, very interested in Right to Information Act in India. And I have a plan to introduce this Right to Information Act and studies around it in our course very soon. The Political Science Department of our university has this course in their graduate syllabus, and they study Right to Information. I discussed with them regarding Right to Information Act. Not only that, I became an activist, sort of self-styled activist, in filing several Right to Information applications in my own university, and have learned a lot on these by using this law. So while I was doing this, I was also searching in the literature about what are the papers, research works done in this field. So I took help of Google, and one day I came across the name of Alasdair Roberts. And his paper on Indian Right to Information Act at that time was not published, but the paper, it was said that it will be published very soon in a very famous international journal on public administration. I downloaded the paper and read it, and I found a lot of interesting things in the paper for my own activism and also for anthropology. So what I did, I read the paper and I sent a mail to Alasdair Roberts at Suffolf University. So it was immediately responded by Alasdair, and he referred to me his website. And when I went to the website, I found that there were at least 40 papers, if I am not wrong, published by Roberts on RTI in the different countries of the world. I was amazed that how a person can study RTI laws and their implementations in so many different countries. So I got interested in Alasdair Roberts. I kept in touch with him, and on that day I decided that one day opportunity may come when we may invite him in my university. Although I didn't know, because I contacted many such persons in this way, many of them have come, many of them have not. I didn't get the opportunity. The opportunity came, and he said that he would be coming to India for his own work. He has visited India several times, but West Bengal for the first time. And we are happy that we have been able to bring him straight here in Vidyasagar University. So I didn't miss the opportunity. I invited Alasdair, and he said that we will come. I talked to our Vice Chancellor, showed him his books. I said yesterday that I publicized your work at Vidyasagar University. You are now well known in Vietnam. So with these few words, I pay my tribute, my respects, my admiration for Roberts' work, and I feel happy for inviting him, and he will deliver a very interesting talk to you. Today we will learn a lot of things and think about the anthropological implications of what he says in this occasion. I also am very much grateful to Dr. Rajkumar Kothari, who is a very good friend of mine. His area of specialization is far away from anthropology, but I don't know, one day we may come much closer. He studies international relations between countries and all these. These are too far from the anthropological methods. We use participant observation. I do not know how this can be employed in studying international relations. I am very happy. Now I won't spend much time by standing between the speakers, the chair and you. So I invite, today we missed Dr. Kaushik Ghosh and our Vice Chancellor also. He is a very energetic person who is a historian. I leave the chair and managing of all affairs to Dr. Kothari. So Rajkumar, if you please come. But before that, we have some small things to do. I want to finish up because Al has to go to Calcutta to attend some invitation by 6. So we are going to finish this. We are already late. We are going to finish it by 1:30. That's our target. But before that, I invite our students to present flower bouquets to our distinguished guests.
I think it's
Sanjay, we have two more things to present. This is our Department of Publication. Roberts and Onilban, because this yes. This book to Dr. Rajkumar Kothari.
Thank you very
No,
much.
this is Rajkumar. Yes. Okay. So, Alasdair, please open the book. Will you open the book?
Very well asked.
Yes. You may not have seen this book. This book has a chapter. This is our departmental publication. You can also have this book. This book has a chapter on governance, written by a British anthropologist. He also came here. He is a good friend of mine. His name is Professor Alan Ryu. And Alan Ryu studied governance in Orissa villages. He studied in detail the panchayats and all these institutions. And he has good contacts with political scientists in England and in USA. So with this I think is a, yes. I have another thing, so Shubhanjan, will you please come? This is a very small gift, a token gift. This is just 500 rupees, which we present, which we give to our speakers. I got it, give the money in front of the public because of transparency. When we talk on writing, yes. Somebody may file an RTI application, was the money being given or not. Rajkumar will not get any money because he is our faculty. So, Rajkumar.
Much more is left out. But before that, at the very outset, I must thank and congratulate the Department of Anthropology for organizing this kind of special lecture by an eminent personality. I also thank Kaushika and Abhijita for giving me this opportunity to chair this session and share my views with and all of you. Now, to start with, I have a lot to talk about Alasdair Roberts, but I will be very brief since time is too short. Alasdair Roberts is the, as already Abhijita has partly introduced, Jerome RobertsPart Professor of Law and Public Policy at Suffolf University Law School and Faculty Director of the RobertsPart Center of Law and Public Service. Professor Roberts writes on problems of governance, law and public policy, as very rightly pointed out by Abhijita. His 2006 book, Blacked Out, Government Secrecy in the Information Age. This is a very famous book. I have the chance to read a couple of pages of this book, written by Professor Alasdair Roberts. So this book is, as far as this book is concerned, he has received couple of awards from different institutions and universities. And then another book, Collapse of Fortress Bush, The Crisis of Authority in American Government. This also published by New York University Press in the year 2008. Kirkus' review called it a trenchant analysis of the last 8 years of American political history. His another book, The Logic of Discipline, Global Capitalism and the Architecture of Government, was published by Oxford University Press in 2010. I am having this book with me, and again I have the chance to read a couple of pages, and it's indeed a very interesting book. So I would advise and suggest our students also, in due course, you should also have the opportunity to go through such important books. Professor Roberts then was elected as a fellow of the US National Academy of Public Administration in the year 2007. He is also an honorary senior research fellow of the School of Public Policy, University College, London. He is co-editor of the journal Governance. A Canadian citizen, Professor Roberts received a JD from the University of Toronto in the year 1984. A master's degree in public policy from Harvard University in 1986 and a PhD in public policy from Harvard University in the year 1994. Professor Alasdair Roberts is also engaged with several activities, and his current appointments are as follows. Jerome L. RobertsPart2, Professor of Law and Public Policy, Suffolf University, already I have stated this. Then co-editor of the journal Governance, public member, Administrative Conference of the United States, fellow, National Academy of Public Administration, honorary senior research fellow, Constitution Unit, School of Public Policy, University College of London, research associate, Institute for National Security at Syracuse University. Then he is associated with editorial boards of different journals. A couple of them are Board of Editors, Korean Social Science Journal he is attached with, then Canadian Public Administration Journal, Journal of Poverty Alleviation and Development, Administration and Society, Governance already I have stated. So many more journals, approximately more than he is associated with editorial boards of 10 journals. And then previous academic appointments also, it's a long list. I am just skipping this list to make the floor open for Professor Alasdair Roberts so that he can share his views on right to information amidst us. Now, without taking much time, may I request you, sir, to make a presentation, say for about half an hour?
Sure.
Will it be all right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Please, the floor is open.
Thank you. Can we just set up the PowerPoint though?
Yeah, yes, it's already set up.
Oh, it is set up. Flattered by the generous introductions. And I'm going to talk a bit about the right to information, and I'll talk for about 30 minutes. But you should know that if you have any questions as I'm going along in my presentation, please do put up your hand and ask a question as we're going along. You don't need to wait until the end of the presentation. So I'm going to talk a bit about the right to information and some of the challenges that we confront as we try to make government more open. And let me just start by making a couple of observations. Sometimes I will talk about the right to information. Sometimes I will also talk about the idea of transparency in government, which is a related idea. And transparency in government is a very fashionable word today. Everybody says transparency is an essential part of good governance. And actually, I suppose for anthropologists, this is an interesting question. Why does everybody talk about transparency these days? If I had gathered a group of experts in government together 20 years ago and asked them what the essential parts of good government were, they would say things like, government must be responsive to the people, it must be free of corruption, it must be efficient, it must be fair, but probably no one would have said that it must be transparent. But today everybody says government should be transparent. So it's a very interesting transformation over the period of about 20 years. And in fact, we have a quote here from a fellow who is the former president of the World Bank, who says that transparency is now regarded as essential to good governance. And what do I mean by that when I say transparency? Usually we're talking about a state of affairs in which individuals outside government can see what's going on inside government. They have the capacity to scrutinize the internal operations of public bodies. That's what transparency is about. Now, an interesting question is, how do you make governments transparent? And there are a variety of policies or laws that you can adopt to promote transparency. So let me just talk about a few of them. One of the most famous ways you can do this is by adopting a right to information law, like the right to information law that India adopted in 2005. And a right to information law does four things. The first is that it says that you have a right to request access to documents that are held by government agencies. So it establishes, first of all, your right to make a request for government documents. The second is that it establishes a procedure for exercising that right. It tells you what you need to do in order to file a request and how long the government agency has to respond to your request and so on. And then third, the law will say the circumstances or grounds on which a government official can refuse to give you information. Because every right to information law recognizes that you can't see every document in a bureaucratic filing cabinet. A government official might say, national security prevents us from giving this information, or commercial confidentiality, or personal privacy. The third thing the law does is enumerate the reasons why a public servant can refuse to give you the information. And then the fourth thing that a law will do is say what your remedy is if you feel that you have been unfairly denied information. And in India, you are allowed, for example, to go to an information commission, which is a body that will look at your complaint and make a ruling about whether the information has been improperly denied to you. So that's what a right to information law does. Now, a very interesting thing is the rapid way in which countries have adopted right to information laws over the last, say, 20 years. 20 years ago, there were probably only 12 or 15 countries that had right to information laws. Today, there are about 90 countries that have right to information laws. So India is among, say, one of 70 different countries that have adopted these laws just in the last few years. And another interesting question is, why was everyone suddenly adopting these right to information laws? Even China, which you don't normally think of as a democratic state, has adopted something like a right to information law. So today, most of the people on the planet live in countries that have some kind of national right to information law or regulation. And I'll be talking a bit more about that later. But the thing I want to say here is that right to information laws are not the only way in which we improve transparency in government. For example, many countries are now adopting what are called public interest disclosure laws or whistleblower laws. So let's suppose you are a government public servant. You're a public servant working in a government agency, and you see something happening in your agency that you think is wrong. Maybe you see some corruption. You would like to tell the public about the things that are going wrong in your agency. What a public interest disclosure law does is give you legal protection if you disclose that information to the public. You are given protection against being fired or persecuted by your employer, for example. So that is yet another way in which transparency is promoted. And there are other ways in which transparency is promoted, and a very good example is again here in India, the Rural Employment Guarantee Act, which has rules about transparency written right into that statute, which says that information about that specific program has to be disclosed, and if I'm correct, says there are also social audit provisions that are peculiar to that particular program. So this is not like a right to information law, which affects all parts of government. This affects just this one part of government. And the Americans actually learned something from India in this case, because after the financial crisis, they adopted a public spending bill which was intended to revive the economy. It was called the ARRA, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. And they did something like what India had already done in the National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. They put provisions for publication of information right in that specific bill so that people could see that the money was not being spent inappropriately. So that's another way in which you can promote transparency. There are a few other policies. For example, a group of non-governmental organizations have started something called the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. What does that involve? It is a movement that suggests that companies like oil companies or mining companies should be compelled to disclose the amount of money they pay to governments for the right to take those resources. And the premise is that very often citizens don't know what their own governments have received from major multinational corporations for the exploitation of oil and gas. And so that's an example about transparency in a particular sector, in the energy sector. And then finally, another interesting way in which we're pursuing transparency right now is through what are sometimes called open data initiatives. What does this mean? Sometimes governments have very big data sets. This is a technology issue that they collect inside government agencies, and the notion is those big data sets should be provided to the public so that the public can find ways to make money off them or to find ways of gleaning important pieces of information out of this so-called big data. So if you go to the United States now, you can go on the web and find out whether your plane is likely to arrive on time, whether the particular flight you're flying arrives on time, usually, or whether it's late or early. And that's because a government agency released all that data to the public, and some clever individual thought, oh, I can find a way to make money off this enterprise. So, I mention all this just to make the point that transparency isn't just about the right to information law. There are many different ways in which many different people are trying to promote transparency. And one of the reasons why this field is so exciting right now is that there is an international community of people who work with one another to promote transparency. So we exchange emails all the time, people in many different countries, some people who are working in government, some people who are working in non-governmental organizations, exchanging information about how to promote transparency and problems that have arisen in certain countries. And it's a very interesting global community interested about transparency. So, all of what I have told you is good news, that people are interested in transparency, that there are different ways in which they are promoting transparency, and that there's this community of people who are fighting for increased transparency. But now let me tell you a bit about some of the bad news, the challenges that people continue to confront. And problem number one is what I will call an implementation problem. Implementation is a phrase that's used by political scientists or people in public management, and what this means is the task of making the law work in practice. And I'm sure you can probably think of many times in which your government has adopted a law which seems to promise great things, but then it never really seems to work in practice. That's because the government didn't take implementation seriously. Sometimes we say the law becomes a dead law because it doesn't do anything in practice. This is a major issue in RTI law around the world. I mentioned to you that there are 90 countries that have RTI laws right now. If I had to guess how many countries actually have working RTI laws that actually give you in practice the capacity to acquire government information, I would guess maybe 25 or 30. Most of the laws that have been adopted around the world are dead laws. They're on the books, but they don't work in practice. And why don't they work in practice? Sometimes because the government never really had any interest in improving openness to start with. They adopted the law because they wanted to impress some international organization, or they wanted to give a concession to some politically important group, but they never really had an intention of making the law work. So there are things that have to happen if you want to make an RTI law work. You have to explain to your own government officials what the law requires. You have to set up procedures so that an individual who gets an RTI request knows what to do with it. You have to make sure that you're organizing your documents properly so that you know how to search the documents and retrieve them if somebody makes a request for information. If you've ever seen a government filing cabinet or a government office where the paper is piled up all over the place, think to yourself, how is an RTI law supposed to work in a circumstance like that? You ask for certain documents and the public servant looks around his office and says, I don't even know where to find it. And this is a very common problem. So to make the law work, you have to invest. You have to invest in training and procedures and records management, and most governments don't do that. And so the law does not work. That's one problem. The second problem is enforcement. What do you do if you make a request for information and you don't get the information? Now, a very common problem is what is sometimes called a mute refusal. You make a request for information and you get no response at all. They don't even bother denying the request, they just say nothing at all. Well, according to the law, you have the right to go to the Information Commissioner, who investigates your complaint and looks at the information, and if he thinks that you are right, gives you the information. He is like the policeman in this process. Well, what happens if the government appoints information commissioners who are actually hostile to the entire idea of the right to information? Or what happens if they don't allocate any money for the operation of the information commissioner's office? Then you don't have any enforcement, and then the bureaucrats know, well, we can get away with anything because there is no remedy for if we break the law. That is a very common problem as well. And you can see indications of that problem in India, and one way it shows up is the number of complaints complaints that pile up in an Information Commission office that are not resolved. Hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of complaints that are not resolved. If this could become a very serious problem, because eventually public servants will say, I'm not going to bother complying with the law. There's no penalty for me if I do. So that's the second problem. A third problem is the problem of privatization. So RTI is about allowing you access to information that is held by public agencies that do important work. What if the government decides that it is going to let a private sector company do the public work? So I know one example in India. You have many nice new airports in India. The Delhi airport is beautiful. The Bangalore airport is beautiful. I see you're building a new airport in Kolkata that looks very nice. I don't know about the airport here, but the Delhi and Bangalore airports are private enterprises. They're not government-owned airports. So the right to information law does not apply to those airports because they are private functions. This is a common problem. Whenever a government hires a contractor to do government work, the RTI law does not apply. If you go overseas and you fly to Britain, the air traffic control organization, the organization that controls the passage of planes in the sky, is now a private company. So the RTI law does not apply to it. So this is a very common problem. How do we think about RTI in a world in which private organizations are doing public work? And then another problem is how we think about RTI in the security sector. By security sector, I mean police agencies, intelligence agencies, military, defense agencies, and so on. That's the security sector of government. And governments are always very cautious about allowing RTI to apply to the security sector. And I believe I'm right in saying that in India, some organizations are even entirely excluded from the RTI law. So this is a very difficult area as well. And then finally, the one area problem that I would mention actually is not a problem of government at all. It's a problem of civil society. And the problem is civil society capacity. What do I mean by this? You need to have non-governmental organizations or individuals outside government who know how to use the law and are persistent in using the law. So think about what you need to know in order to use an RTI law. You need to know what the law says, and there aren't many people who know that. You need to know how the bureaucracy works. You need to know what government office has the information you would like. And very often you need to know how they organize their filing cabinet. You need to know what kind of record do I want to ask for exactly. Because if you're vague about what you ask for, you won't get the information. And you need to be persistent. So I've filed RTI requests in many countries. A lot of the requests that I filed went on for 2 or 3 years. One request I filed in Britain went on for 5 years. And at a certain point, after about the 4th year, I didn't want the information anymore. I no longer cared. But I was not going to let them get away with it. So I just kept at it. So you have to be persistent. So a law won't work if a country doesn't have individuals and groups who have this knowledge and persistence to make the law work. Not only that, you need groups that know how to interpret the information once they get it. They get a government document, but you have to sort out what it means. That is a civil society responsibility. And you have to do all these things knowing that you could pay a very heavy price for persisting. And this is a problem in India. Individuals who are harassed or injured or sometimes killed because they file RTI requests. So The trick to making a law succeed in the long run is having a community of people outside government who are deeply committed to the law. Many countries, not India, do not succeed because they don't have that civil society capacity. So, let me just close by saying a couple of things. We are still very much in the early phases of the movement for transparency. It's only a few years old. You've seen that we have many different ways we think of improving transparency, but we are still in the phase of trial and error and seeing what works. And we are learning from each other about how to achieve transparency. And in this respect, I think I would want to emphasize the great importance of what is going on in India today with regard to the RTI law. RTI is important for Indians, but it's also important for the rest of the world to see how RTI works in India. And that's true for a couple of different reasons. So I come from Canada, which adopted an RTI law several years ago. And the law works okay. Not great, but it works okay. But, you know, Canada has some advantages. It is a wealthy country. It has a very professional civil service that has very well-organized records, and it has no significant problem of corruption. So in conditions like that, it is relatively easy to make an RTI law work. The bigger challenge is making a law work in poorer countries where corruption is a more serious problem. If we can learn how to make RTI law work in those circumstances, we will have achieved a great thing, because most of the world lives in those circumstances. So many people are looking to India and watching to see how the law works here. But I do think that there is reason for optimism. There are two things that are very distinctive about the Indian experiment. The first is that many people know about RTI and are committed to the idea of RTI. You can open up a newspaper and read about RTI in India. And in a lot of countries that's not true. There's only a very small number of people who actually know about the right to information. But here many people do. And that makes it more difficult for governments to undermine or retreat from RTI law. And the second great advantage you have is that you have a very strong and healthy community of individuals outside government who are using the law, who know how to use the law, and who are being very persistent in using the law. And for those reasons, I am very optimistic about the Indian experiment with RTI. So I've gone on very long, but I'd be pleased to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you for giving a very lucid presentation for our students. Before we go for question and answer session, I have one or two queries, if you can clarify. You have talked about Canada, the right to information, this law, the way it works. And you have talked a bit about India also. But what about US? Where does it stand? Is it something more transparent compared to Canada, or less? What is your opinion? And secondly, in India, what happens, so Vijita knows very well, that there is certain time frame that once you submit a petition within certain specific period, say for 30 days, I suppose 30 days the maximum time, that within that period government is compelled, bound to respond. So is there any such provision in United States or Canada or other countries which you have studied?
Yeah. So on the first point, one question I actually get very often is the United States more open than Canada? And I think the answer is probably yes. It's not because of differences in the RTI law. I actually think in some respects the Canadian RTI law is better than the American RTI law. One major difference is that if you're unhappy in Canada, you can go to an information commissioner, which is easy to do, and the commissioner is very well funded. In the United States, if you are unhappy about a request for information, you have to go to a court. You have to get a lawyer, you have to go to court. It's very complicated, very expensive, so people don't do it. Having said that, overall, for many different reasons, the United States is more open than Canada because of other policies and traditions about disclosing information. I mean, Canada, don't forget, used to be a British colony, so we had an Official Secrets Act, and we have a very strong bureaucracy, and there was great resistance to the idea of disclosing information. So that's the answer to the first question. On the second question, the time limits for responding to requests.
Because as you said, sometimes it takes 4 years. Still you did not get the information.
Yeah. So in every law, I think it's right to say, every law has a time limit for responding to requests. In Canada, it's 30 days. I can't remember what it is in Britain. It might be 20 days. But sometimes, you know, officials just ignore the deadline. Or they say we need more time, and sometimes the law gives them more time to think about very complicated cases. Or sometimes they simply respond within the deadline. You know, one very efficient way of dealing with the deadline is simply to say no. You know, they can do that very quickly. No right to information. That's the UK case. And so the reason my request took so long in the United Kingdom was that they said no, I appealed. They said no, I appealed. And then it took about 3 or 4 years for the Information Commission.
In India, what happens is there are some areas where already in advance they say that these are restricted.
Yeah.
Say, as you say, you talked about security areas, military security. These are very sensitive areas. So government is not inclined to furnish information. But in other areas, you can challenge. If you within 30 days, if I am not getting response, I can challenge the authority.
Yeah.
And I should get the new result. So.
That's right, but the difficulty is, let's suppose you make a request for information, and let's suppose you don't get a response in the time limit, and you say, that's a violation of the law. I'm going to make a complaint to the Information Commissioner. Now, the Information Commissioner, let's suppose, has several thousand complaints. He may take 2 years to deal with your complaint. The public servant knows that. So effectively, he knows he's got 2 years to deal with your request for information. That's the more common problem.
And another thing that you have talked about civil society. Like civil society, suppose if civil society is very strong, then obviously it is in favor of RTI. People easily can get more information because they are always under pressure from the civil society. But in most of the poorer countries, where civil society has not yet even formed properly. So in that case, what happened? How are they dealing with? That means, are they not getting the required information?
Yeah. Well, I don't think this is the Indian case. I
No,
think
not in India.
But in other countries, it is a problem.
Yeah.
And sometimes they have civil society capacity that is supported by international development money, for example, but that can provoke very strong reaction against government. But you know, even in developed countries, even in rich countries, the problem of civil society capacity is very serious. So a lot of people who use laws in countries like the United States are journalists. They work for newspapers or they work for broadcast TV. Now, one of the problems is that those people, those newspapers, earn their revenue by selling advertising. If they don't sell advertising, they can't hire journalists. The internet is destroying the advertising base for newspapers. So revenue for newspapers in the United States has declined by about 40% over the last 3 years. And there have been massive cuts to the newsrooms of newspapers over the last few years. So there are fewer journalists, therefore they file fewer requests.
Right. So So friends, Al has very rightly presented the both sides of the right to information laws. First of all, he has given a presentation about what are the positive sides, positive aspects of this right to information law with regard to in respect of different countries. And then he has talked about some challenges facing this particular law in different countries. Now, as far as challenges are concerned, I am more concerned about the challenges in respect of the developing world or the poorer country, as you have rightly pointed out, that you need certain investment to make the right to information law is work in practice. And poorer countries are not in a position, as already has pointed out, to invest adequate money. So in that case, this is obviously a bottleneck before us. And in the long run, we'll see that how the poorer or the developing countries they overcome this particular problem. Otherwise, after hearing from Al, the impression I am getting is that the way Right to Information Act is working in India from since 2005, this is introduced. I suppose we are in a better and comfortable position compared to other countries. Anyway, now the floor is open for questions answer. Be very brief. You can ask question in Bengali also, and you can ask questions in English. And Al is here to answer. But one request: be very brief and precise. Yes.
Enlightening, and I'd like to know a very vague question which I'd like to pose about the acceptability of this RTI Act. Like, who can access or who has the right to appeal for this right to information? Is it restricted to citizen only, or is it that someone from different countries or different
Citizens of other countries,
Right.
you mean to say,
Yeah.
are they eligible?
I actually can't remember, does India, I can't remember whether Indian law restricts it to citizens or not. It's a point of discussion about whether it should be restricted to citizens. For example, the American law is not. Anybody can file a request.
Outsider.
Yeah, you can be a citizen, you can be a non-citizen, you can live in the United States, you can live outside the United States.
Let me illuminate her. In India, the question is one has to have Indian citizenship. Recently, a case has come up. A doctor, an Indian doctor, he was an Indian American citizen working in Ohio, and his wife died for maltreatment in Calcutta. So he filed RTI applications. His name is Kunal Dutt. He is now fighting case in Calcutta High Court, and it has also gone to Supreme Court. So he filed an RTI. It was rejected on the ground that he is not an Indian citizen. Then he appealed in Calcutta High Court. Calcutta High Court also rejected his appeal. He went to Supreme Court. Supreme Court, there was a special bench, and the bench declared that since Kunal Dutt had an Indian origin, so his RTI applications are valid. So persons having Indian origin can file RTI applications according to, even if they are citizens of other countries. Actually, nothing is clearly written in the RTI Act that who can really file, who can't really file RTI applications.
Access outsiders are eligible.
This is a case. These cases happened. I am just citing the case. You know, a lot of things happens which are not written in the law, and then it acts like a law. The scenario is like this. So you have to go case by case. By and large, in India, there are few instances of rejection of application on the ground that there is no caste, nothing like that. Nothing prevents you to file an RTI application in India. Anybody, and there is no special favor for any caste or tribe, as in case of other laws. So everybody is viewed equal for the RTI. There is no special favor for tribes in case of filing RTI, and there is no demand for it as well from the civil society. There are some favors in favor of the stamp duty or the money you have to pay in case of people belonging to below poverty line, you don't have to pay the 10 rupees. It again varies from state to state in India. So you are free. If you are a scheduled tribe, you don't have to pay the money. These are the relaxations given in the RTA.
But one problem, Abhijit, which he has pointed,
Yes.
and more privatization in the coming years, it is obvious that more and more privatization.
But as here I would point out one thing. You have said that in Indian RTI, you can't file RTI applications to know about a private company's things. But recently there is again a case. A person who was working in Infosys, he filed an RTI asking for some internal audit report of this Infosys. So the application was rejected on the ground that the private companies doesn't come under purview of RTI. That man went for appeal, and finally the Central Information Commissioner gave a ruling. The ruling was that since the company was registered under Companies Registration Act of the Indian government, so that company must give his internal audit report to that particular person. So what finally came out, for delaying the information, Indian law is much better than laws of other countries, as I know from you. Infosys official was fined by 25,000 rupees plus a compensation money for not giving the information, and the information had to be given. Since a private company in India cannot work independently, it has to register for doing business under the Societies Registration Act. But there are
because
interesting
Indian law says
Yeah.
that the Indian law says that you have a right to information held by a private entity that could be obtained by a government agency.
No,
using its
what is
regular-
saying in the definition of the public authorities,
Yeah.
in the preamble of the RTI Act, there is a definition of public authorities. Which are public authorities? The public authorities are defined by two sentences. One says that public authorities are those whose formation has been legalized either in the parliament or in the state assembly. So a Companies Registration Act was formalized in the state or the central, either in the parliament or in the, so it comes under, by corollary it comes under the purview of. And the interesting thing is that I find a contrast of India with other countries. We have told that in Britain, lots of journalists file RTI applications. But interestingly, I do not know whether you know this fact. I think you know, I read it from your paper. It was the FIA and the PricewaterhouseCoopers reports.
Yeah.
That in India, the journalists do not file RTI applications. They wait for information to people like us. I will file RTI application about Vidyasagar University, get some information, give it to the journalist, and they flash it in the newspaper. So they do it. The chain is like this.
Well, this is, one of the problems in other countries is that the community of politicians and journalists is very small. They all know each other.
Yeah.
And so the journalists don't want to upset the politicians by filing an RTI request.
Yes.
So they prefer to try and get the information through informal routes, or they'll have somebody else do it.
Yeah.
In fact, and so one technique journalists use to get around that problem is to ask somebody else to file the request they want to file so that their hands are clean. But interestingly, I did one study that showed that politicians are actually pretty good at figuring out where the request is coming from, even if they're using somebody else to file the request.
I would, if the students have any questions, they can ask.
Yes, anybody?
You can ask in Bengali and we will translate it. No problem.
Is the university covered by RTI?
Yes.
So all of you can file RTI.
Students, here the students and the undergraduate students in our university file most of the RTI applications to know whether they have been properly examined or not.
Your examinations
You can visit our public information officers' office. They are literally, they always say to me that
the RTI X, it's helpful to the people who want to see the information. So like if it is the agency is declining the give the information, so So in that case, what the people can do?
Well, so the question is, what do people do if an agency refuses to give information?
Yes, yes.
And the formal answer is, well, you can make a complaint to the Information Commissioner. But the other answer is, you can make a political fuss about the fact that an agency has denied the information. You get a story about the fact that the agency was being unhelpful. And sometimes that's a more useful story than the story you would have got if you actually got the information. Journalists love stories about agencies that had denied information. So that's the other thing that you can do. And you mobilize politically around about the denial of information. This gets back to the point that this is only in part a story about law. It's also a story about politics and political organization. So a very famous example of RTI in India is the use of RTI in Rajasthan by MKSS, right? So we think that's a story about RTI law only in part. It's really a story about MKSS, their success in organizing communities to raise political consciousness and raise their political power.
And can you throw some light on the misuse of RTI?
Yeah.
Because recently there was a very interesting story, perhaps Vidyasagar is also one of you have gone over it, that the central government, particularly our Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, he said that we need to put some restrictions on the use of RTI because it is being very often misused.
Yeah.
And Sonia Gandhi, she said no, the way it is, it should carry on for some more time, and later on we can go for review. So such misuse in other countries also, I suppose, it's a common problem.
Yeah, all laws are misused, but then when you think about it, and it's not just an RTI law problem.
The problem with RTI is more severe.
No, well, the allegation is that people make frivolous requests
Yes.
or vexatious requests or very burdensome requests, and that they are clogging government business by making all these requests. And there are no doubt individuals who make frivolous, vexatious, and burdensome requests. And some laws actually allow government officials to say, sorry, we will not respond to this request. And then if the individual wants to appeal, there will be a judgment about whether the request was frivolous or vexatious. But part of the difficulty here is that bureaucrats and citizens have different ideas about what constitutes a burdensome request. Public servants just want to get on with doing their daily job. They regard RTI as a distraction. So what a citizen thinks is very important to the citizen may not strike the bureaucrat as very important at all. And that's the difficulty that arises here. Who's going to make the judgment about whether a request is frivolous?
This is about another interesting story I read in newspaper. That's in Vidyasagar district, some Bengali daily carrying this news, that one individual filed RTI petition seeking some important documents and information from Panchayat. And in response to that, it is interesting to know, Panchayat said we need to spend more than ₹1 lakh to furnish those information.
Yeah.
We don't have that fund.
That's another area where, and that's an important point. So let's suppose somebody makes a request, and it actually is an important request. There's a reason for making a request, but it's a very big request.
Right.
And it would cost a lot of money to deal with it. I think there is a legitimate ground for government to say, this is very expensive, we have to reach some kind of compromise or accommodation here. And most laws allow the agency to say, you have to narrow your request to make it more specific, or we're not obliged to respond to a request if it costs more than a certain amount of money to handle it. So you do have to deal with these very expensive requests. And that's another area where what we learn from India is going to be very important. So in Canada, there was a study done many years ago, and the study said that the average cost of responding to an RTI request was about $1,000, which would be about 55,000 rupees, which is a lot of money, right? And so the question would be, is it good policy to allow that kind of request to be made in the Indian context? And Indians might decide we're going to have a different way of thinking about this cost issue because we are a developing country.
But Rajkumar, there are other points too.
Yes.
You are giving it from the government. That information is costly. Where does the cost come from? You see, I know a case of a person who wanted a full 5,000 page report from an engineering department. So the Indian department said that these 5,000 pages report cannot be given because of Xeroxing cost and all this. What happened actually, the agency failed to provide information within 30 days. And the Indian RTI law is very good in that if the agency, the PIO fails to give information within 30 days, after that the Xeroxing cost has to be borne by the office itself, not by the individual, because you have faltered. So in that case, that man was asking for the Xeroxing cost to the agency. The agency was saying that it's not possible because 5,000 pages report that will cost so much rupees. So finally, what was settled, that man was allowed to inspect the document instead of getting the Xerox copies, because there is a provision in the Indian RTI that certain information which cannot be handed down over to the applicant can be inspected. For example, the models. Suppose I want to have the model of the Howrah Bridge. I can ask for it by the RTI. It will not be given to me because it's not possible to make a similar model and hand it over to you. You have to come to the PIO's office and inspect the document. So there are provisions of inspecting. You look at RTI from the applicant's point of view. PRIA has calculated the cost of RTI application to be filed by a poor scheduled tribe in interior villages. Suppose a person who earns 100 rupees per day, if he or she has to file an RTI application with a 10 rupee cost, then how much percentage of his earning he is spending for an RTI application? And it was projected that 10 rupee for a poor person is 1,000 rupees actually in terms of his income. So the cost of one RTI application to be made by a very poor person living in an interior of a village is actually much higher than what you think.
But government is giving some relaxation, as you also pointed out.
Government is giving some relaxation too, only for the scheduled tribes.
Only for scheduled
yes,
tribes.
and for the below poverty line people. But then again, that person, if you give him relaxation, he has to travel a long distance by bus or by foregoing his 1 day's wage to file an RTI application in the block office to the BLRO or something like that. So that costs. So the cost of filing RTI application for poor citizens in India is much higher. So then there was a debate whether that cost should be taken at all or not. In Haryana, for example, one has to pay 100 rupees for filing one RTI application. In West Bengal it is 10, and in Bihar you will be surprised to know. Bihar, the Nitish Kumar government has waived all kinds of fees for all kinds of people for making RTI application. Bihar is an example which has to be said to everybody. They have recently developed a system of you can file your RTI application from your mobile.
Yeah.
They have a Jankari center. You file your RTI application even if you are an illiterate, you just orally you tell it, it will be tape recorded, you transcribe, the PIO will write down your application, place it and give the information to you. Bihar, Nitish Kumar has made a revolution in terms of RTI application. We do not know it. In West Bengal we think that Bihar is bad, Bihar is less progressive and West Bengal is much progressive.
There's no other country in the world that does what Bihar does.
Yes. What Bihar does. Bihar has now become a model for many European countries as well. Al, I have one important question I will forget before you finish up. What I am interested in, that what help you think you would get, the persons, it's also a question to Rajkumar, from the anthropologists. How anthropologists can help you in studying these RTI?
Well, you know, one interesting question would be how public servants think about RTI.
Yes, it's very important.
Because they develop attitudes about RTI over time, right? And it affects the way in which they respond to requests. If they think that RTI is a nuisance and it's being abused, they won't respond to the request. If they think it's an important law, they're more likely to respond favorably. And attitudes about RTI evolve inside the bureaucracy, that little tribe, you know,